A hush fell over the dusty carnival grounds, broken only by the thunderous roar of a cage rattling in the distance, a roar so potent it shook the very air in your lungs. Men staggered back with wide eyes and trembling hands, and seasoned trainers traded worried glances. For no one in this travelling circus, not even the most fearless among them, had ever seen such unbridled fury trapped behind iron bars. This was the wild bear no one could tame. Little did they know that everything would change the day an unsuspecting girl, small enough to slip through the bars, decided to walk right into its cage. The Cirque du Destin was no ordinary travelling carnival. It roamed the country from town to town, enchanting audiences with dazzling acrobatics, exotic animals, and illusions that made people wonder if magic truly did exist. The carnival's name was plastered in bright gold letters across a fleet of cumbersome trucks and battered wagons. Colourful flags and billowing tents popped against dreary farmland skies and urban sprawls alike. Among the trucks travelled a small menagerie. The caged animals, once part of a glamorous show, were taken out each night to perform for cheering crowds. Horses danced and pranced on sawdust rings, lions roared on command, and even a couple of old elephants performed slow, poignant routines. But tucked away from public view, behind the rows of tents reserved for staff, sat a heavy iron cage that drew the curious eye of every new roustabout and performer. Inside that cage was a bear named Samson, a hulking, dark-furred beast, acquired in a flurry of uncertain deals when the Cirque du Destin merged with some smaller troops. Among them a handful of former handlers from the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. The moment Samson arrived, the murmurs began. Trainers complained he was wild, untamed and untamable, and that he had nearly mauled the last man who'd tried to coax him into performing. And so Samson remained in the largest cage, away from the ring lights. The battered bars told stories of their own, deep scratches, bent metal from where the powerful creature had hurled himself again and again in frustrated rage. He was fed daily, given water, cleaned up after, but no one dared come close enough to reach through the bars. Even the bravest among the staff took one look at Samson's massive claws and the savage gleam in his eyes and quickly withdrew, leaving him to pace in eternal captivity. When the carnival set up in the outskirts of a small Midwestern town, a quiet, sun-baked place with a single main street, a few local families came by in the afternoon to see if they might catch a glimpse of preparations. That's how a little girl named Eleanor Caldwell found her way to Samson's cage. Eleanor was 9 years old and small for her age, with a perpetual smudge of dirt on her overalls. She had tumbleweed hair and bright, inquisitive eyes that took in the world with the wonder many adults had forgotten. She had heard tales of the travelling circus from the older kids in town, so when she saw the massive tents rising on the outskirts, her heart pounded with excitement. She begged her mother for permission to visit the carnival. Hesitant but wanting to see her daughter smile, her mother finally agreed. They arrived late one scorching afternoon. A single carnival worker waved them in, too busy hauling crates to bother with gatekeeping. Eleanor wandered among crates filled with perplexing illusions, mirrors that distorted shapes, boxes that contortionists would eventually twist themselves into, ropes for the trapeze rig. Then, just beyond the hustle of the big top, she heard a sound that froze her in place. A deep rumble, as though thunder had been trapped in a cage, rolled into a fierce snarl. Eleanor's tiny feet were drawn almost against her will toward that menacing growl. Her mother, momentarily distracted by a flamboyant juggler balancing a flaming torch on his chin, did not notice Eleanor slip away. The child ventured around the side of a tall, striped tent, following her ears until she spotted a cage resting in the shadows, away from the main thoroughfare. And there he was, Samson, a colossal shape of dark fur, pacing back and forth. He stopped when he saw her, or perhaps he smelled the sweet orchard fruit lingering on her clothes from breakfast. There was something curious in the way he regarded her. She wasn't an adult. She wasn't carrying any tools or whips. She was too small to be a threat, and she peered at him with all the innocent wonder of a person seeing a creature not as a menace, but as a marvel, their eyes locked. The air felt still and heavy, as though waiting for something to break the silence. Slowly, uncertainly, Samson padded closer to the iron bars, his muzzle drawn upward to sniff. Eleanor approached one step at a time, not reckless so much as unafraid. She'd grown up around stray dogs and barn cats that skulked about her grandparents' farm. She had a gift, an inexplicable way of reassuring animals that she meant them no harm. But a bear was far beyond her barnyard experiences. She kept her breath steady, her eyes focused on his. Each step brought her nearer until she was close enough to feel the warmth of his massive body radiating through the bars. They observed each other for a long, trembling moment. Samson's eyes were like two molten spheres in a face both regal and fearsome. Eleanor's heart beat wildly, not from fear but from exhilaration, like she was on the brink of a discovery no one else had made. Then she heard it, a whimper. A soft, plaintive whine rose from the bear's throat, sounding so out of place in such a formidable creature. A surge of emotion swept over Eleanor. She stepped back, reached into her overall pocket, and produced an apple she'd been saving for later. Without thinking it might be a risk, she slipped her thin arm through the bars and held it out to him. If any adult had seen her, they would have screamed to stop, but no one was watching. Everyone was busy with the bustle of setting up. Samson sniffed the air again, hesitating. Then, gentler than one might expect from something with jaws strong enough to crush bone, he took the apple from her hand. His lips peeled back as he chewed, muzzle stained with juice. With an almost audible sigh, Samson lowered himself to the floor of the cage, the apple's sweetness lingering in the air. Eleanor, in turn, sank to her knees, her face pressed against the bars, eyes shining. She did not know how or why, but she sensed an understanding had passed between them. She stayed there as the afternoon drifted into early evening, the hot sun waning, leaving behind a cooler breeze that whistled through the half-assembled tents. Eventually, her mother found her. She nearly fainted at the sight of her daughter perched inches away from a beast rumored to be unmanageable. But before she could yank Eleanor away, a wiry, grey-haired man with a circus emblem on his jacket approached in a rush. "Good heavens," he muttered under his breath. "Step away, child." Though Eleanor stood at once, she gave Samson one last glance. His calm gaze followed her as the older man, who introduced himself as Dorian Fitzroy, the lead animal trainer, hurried them to safety. "What on earth were you doing?" Eleanor's mother demanded, her voice trembling. She was torn between scolding her daughter and smothering her in hugs. Dorian, too, was baffled. He'd never once seen Samson look at anyone without aggression. He'd never witnessed the bear's eyes open so tenderly to a human being. As they walked to the exit, Dorian asked Eleanor question after question how long she'd been sitting there. How did she approach him? Had Samson shown his teeth? Had she done anything unusual? Eleanor couldn't explain. She shrugged and said, "He just looked sad and hungry." Though Dorian parted ways with them at the gates, his mind was a whirl with possibilities. He had been trying to work with Samson for weeks. The rest of the staff labeled the bear a lost cause, but Dorian loved animals and refused to give up so easily. Perhaps this child held some key to a trust no adult could establish. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She felt restless in her cozy bedroom. Whenever she closed her eyes, she saw Samson's soulful gaze. In that memory, she believed the bear was as lonely as any living thing could be. When morning came, she pleaded with her mother to let her return to the carnival. Her mother, terrified but also curious, agreed on the condition that Eleanor stayed by her side. They visited again in the late afternoon. The carnival wouldn't officially open until the evening show. Performers practiced in the big top, jugglers tested their props, tightrope walkers teetered overhead, and aerialists soared in test runs on trapezes. Dorian found them quickly. He'd been watching for Eleanor. "We've never let anyone near Samson," he said, keeping his voice low so the passing roustabouts wouldn't overhear. "I can't explain it, but when you were with him he seemed calm, not docile like a house cat, but different. There was no malice in his eyes." Eleanor blushed, unsure how to respond. She offered no explanation or elaborate story, yet her eyes shone with that same unwavering compassion. Her mother folded her arms, wavering between alarm and motherly protectiveness. Could Eleanor see him again from a safer distance? Dorian asked, trying not to frighten the mother. Eventually, with repeated reassurances, Eleanor's mother relented, but only if Dorian promised that no harm would come to her daughter. They approached Samson's cage together. The bear was curled in the corner, as if brooding, but at the sight of Eleanor, he rose, a deep rumble echoing in his chest. It wasn't a threatening growl, more like a question. She extended a small hand in greeting, pressed against the bars. The bear sniffed, exhaled, and then carefully ambled over. Dorian, standing at a safe distance, could hardly believe his eyes. Samson let out a soft huff and settled down, letting his massive head rest on his paws. It was as if the presence of this little girl had lulled his racing mind. That evening, Dorian confided in the ringmaster, a flamboyant man named Marcel Dupont, about the astonishing sight he'd witnessed. But the ringmaster scoffed. "What good is it if the bear's only calm for a little girl?" Marcel demanded. "We can't parade a child into the ring to tame him every night. The audience would find that appalling or dangerous. Besides, the insurance alone," he shook his head. "We'll keep the bear, feed him, but I doubt we'll ever use him in the show. He's too much of a liability." Dorian didn't argue, though a glimmer of hope sparked in him. What if the bond between the girl and the bear could be nurtured? There was a chance, however slim, that Samson could be freed from his cycle of rage. No matter what the ringmaster said, Dorian pledged to try. Days passed. Each afternoon Eleanor came by for a few hours, always with her mother's watchful eye locked on her. She'd bring small treats, apples, carrots, pears, whatever fruit was in season at the local orchard. Samson's raw diet remained the same, but he developed a taste for these sweet offerings. Little by little, Eleanor drew closer until she could reach through the bars and almost stroke his fur. Everyone who saw it would gasp in disbelief. In those quiet hours before the carnival opened to the public, it was just the two of them, Eleanor and Samson, communicating with glances, soft words, and the trust that might blossom between a lonely animal and a compassionate child. Eleanor started to talk to him, telling him about the orchard behind her grandparents' farmhouse. She told him how she'd feed the strays that wandered onto the porch, how she'd always dreamed of having an animal friend who wasn't just a pet, but almost a kindred soul. The bear, of course, couldn't answer, but sometimes he'd tilt his head, as if listening, and the gentle huffs he released gave the impression he was responding in his own way. Yet there was tension within the carnival staff. Some disliked seeing Samson coddled by a child. They'd lost respect for the beast who had once terrified them, and they muttered that he was still dangerous. Wild animals never changed. Dorian, however, noticed Samson's overall demeanor was shifting. He roared less at night. He hardly ever lunged at the bars anymore. If it was Eleanor's presence working some kind of magic, who could say? One afternoon, as Eleanor fed Samson, a sudden chaos broke out. An older lion, spooked by some fireworks being tested near the main tent, lashed out at a caretaker. Shouts erupted across the carnival. People ran for help. In the confusion, Eleanor forgot her mother's warning to never step inside Samson's cage, something she'd never been allowed to do. Amid the chaos, the cage door was left slightly ajar by a panicked roustabout who had been tasked with feeding Samson but fled at the sound of the commotion. Curiosity and concern tugged at Eleanor. She heard the shouting, saw trainers scrambling. She glanced back at Samson and felt that same quiet empathy. In that moment, she took a step inside. It was a dangerous, unthinkable choice. But to the 9-year-old, it felt strangely right, as if the invisible wall between her and the bear was just as cruel and confining as the bars themselves. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. She was fully inside. Samson froze, his muscles rippling under thick fur. A single swing of his paw could have ended her life. But the child felt no fear. She closed the door behind her, though not locked, so no one else would see. She just wanted to comfort him, to show him he wasn't alone. The air in the cage was tinged with the pungent smell of bedding straw and raw meat. Her heart hammered, but she held Samson's gaze. Very slowly, Eleanor took another step forward, then another, until she stood almost within arm's reach. The bear's massive head swung toward her. She heard the rush of breath through his nose, the low rumble in his chest. Yet, to her amazement, there was no savage lunge. Instead, Samson let out a small grunt, a sound of curiosity, of acceptance. Ever so carefully, Eleanor raised a trembling hand. She hovered it just above his snout. Samson didn't move. It was as if he were letting her decide whether she dared bridge that final inch. She pressed her palm against his fur. It was coarse and thick, bristling with the raw power that lay beneath. Though her hand shook, a warmth rushed through her and her eyes filled with tears. Then the commotion settled. The lion had been calmed, the caretaker taken to see a medic. The circus folk spread out to do a head count, ensuring no further accidents had occurred. And that's when Dorian, along with Eleanor's frantic mother, realized the little girl was missing. They followed a trail of suspicion to Samson's cage. A horrifying sight greeted them. The cage door stood slightly open, and inside was Eleanor, her arm resting on Samson's flank as though he were a family dog. Dorian nearly collapsed from terror. Eleanor's mother screamed, alerting the rest of the carnival. Samson lifted his enormous head with a huff, reacting more to the sudden noise than anything else. In a heartbeat, Dorian flung open the cage's outer gate and slipped inside, ignoring the alarmed calls from the other staff. He gently seized Eleanor by the shoulders, pulling her away from the bear. Her mother rushed forward, tears streaming down her face, grabbing her daughter in a desperate embrace. A tense hush gripped the onlookers. Samson rose to his full height, towering over them. His lips parted. The potential for a devastating mauling loomed, but the bear merely lumbered to the back of the cage with a heavy breath, as if resigned to some sadness. Dorian locked the cage door, sweat pouring down his brow, heart hammering in his chest. Eleanor's mother chastised her with trembling sobs, hugging her so tightly she nearly squashed the girl's breath. Word spread like wildfire. The staff and performers were divided between marvel and outrage. The ringmaster, Marcel Dupont, was more than outraged, he was furious. He berated Dorian, vowing to tighten security. He even threatened to have Samson shipped away to a remote reserve. Eleanor's mother, after this close call, forbade her daughter from returning to the carnival, no matter how much the child wept. Some of the handlers who had always seen Samson as a lost cause felt vindicated. See? This is exactly why we must keep him caged and away from people. But the incident also sparked something else, a sliver of awe among a few who had glimpsed the moment. For in that sliver of time, no one had missed the serenity in Samson's eyes as Eleanor touched him. The staff who had hated or feared him saw, if only for an instant, that perhaps Samson was not a monstrous brute. He was an animal in pain, longing, and confusion. The next morning, no matter how sternly her mother insisted, Eleanor slipped away from home. She felt compelled to see Samson again. She had never seen such an expression of sorrow in an animal's eyes. With tears streaming down her face, she dashed to the carnival grounds. The big top towered above, but in daylight, the place looked deserted, and a bit run-down bits of trash swirling in a breeze. Workers dozing off under wagons, instruments strewn about from a late-night show. She found Samson's cage draped in heavy canvas, presumably to keep the bear from gawking spectators or from Eleanor. She heard the low rumble of his breathing from inside. Eleanor's gut twisted. She called out his name softly at first, then louder, but no answer came. She wanted so badly to tear back the canvas and talk to him, but she also knew she'd get in trouble for even being here. "You can't see him," came a voice from behind. It was Dorian. His expression was somber. Eleanor's lip quivered. "They're going to send him away, aren't they?" Dorian sighed. "The ringmaster is considering it. He wants to avoid any further danger, especially after yesterday's scare." Then his voice softened. "It's not your fault, Eleanor. You showed Samson more kindness in 1 week than he's had in his entire life here. But the ringmaster sees only risk." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "Why does everyone treat him like a monster?" "He never tried to hurt me. He's just scared and lonely." Dorian nodded. "I know, and part of me wonders if you're the only person who truly sees him for what he is." He hesitated, then knelt so he was at eye level with her. "Maybe we can convince the ringmaster to give him another chance." That evening, the carnival was abuzz with gossip. The rumor of the child who entered the wild bear's cage became a sensational whisper that drifted to the local townsfolk. Some found it terrifying, others found it miraculous. A few nights later, the circus grounds were more crowded than usual. People had heard about a ferocious, untamable bear, and the show saw an uptick in ticket sales from the curious and the thrill-seekers. Behind the scenes, Eleanor and Dorian devised a plan. They believed if the ringmaster saw Samson in a calmer state, if he saw the bear respond to gentle treatment, in a more official demonstration he might relent and let the carnival keep him in a kinder environment. Possibly, with Eleanor's help, they could even introduce Samson into the show safely, or at least allow him a better life than the cold isolation of an iron cage. The tricky part was convincing Eleanor's mother. She wanted no more near-death experiences. But after days of tearful pleas from Eleanor and repeated assurances from Dorian that they'd do nothing reckless or unsupervised, she grudgingly allowed her daughter to visit the carnival one final time. They would create a small demonstration for the ringmaster, showing that Samson could be guided calmly if the atmosphere was right. Dorian had never attempted to properly train Samson, given the bear's initial hostility, but he had a wealth of experience from his years in the trade. He borrowed tactics that had been used with big cats and elephants, gentle guidance, gradual introductions, never forcing an animal to comply through pain or fear. He also read up on the natural behaviors of North American brown bears, referencing notes once shared by an acquaintance from the Ringling Brothers' days who had rehabilitated wild animals. In the early morning hush, well before the carnival opened, Dorian stood outside Samson's cage with Eleanor. The child had her pockets stuffed with apples and carrots, while Dorian carried a long training stick with a padded tip, never a whip. He also had a bucket of small fish, as bears love fish almost as much as they love fruit. Their plan was simple: open the cage door just enough to allow Samson a sense of freedom, but keep him within an enclosed ring that had been reinforced for large animals. Eleanor would remain outside the ring, but near enough that Samson could see and smell her. Dorian would slowly guide him around, giving voice commands and rewarding him with treats. The ringmaster would watch. If it went well, maybe Samson could become part of a small act, or at least be allowed better living conditions. They inhaled a collective breath as the cage door creaked open. Samson rumbled in uncertainty, but he stepped gingerly out into the ring, turning his massive head to glance at Eleanor, as if seeking her approval. Dorian began speaking calmly in measured, low tones, calling out basic words like sit, stop, come, just to gauge Samson's reaction. Each time Samson made even the slightest move in compliance, Dorian rewarded him with a piece of fish or fruit. Eleanor stood near the barrier, calling encouragement in a soft voice. For a while, everything was peaceful. Samson ambled in a circle, occasionally lifting his snout to sniff the air. Dorian gave him space, refusing to rush or crowd him. Marcel Dupont, perched on a wooden crate some distance away, watched with folded arms and a skeptical glare. But as minutes passed and nothing catastrophic happened, an emotion flickered across the ringmaster's face that looked suspiciously like wonder. Suddenly, a loud crash from behind the ring startled Samson. A crate of metal props had toppled off a cart. The clang reverberated through the still morning air, and Samson reared up on his hind legs. His eyes flared with alarm. Dorian froze. Marcel sprang from his seat. Eleanor, too, reacted with a startled gasp. The bear bellowed a ferocious roar that boomed across the carnival grounds, sending the few workers present scurrying for cover. Dorian tried to speak soothing words, to wave a piece of fish, but Samson's instincts had kicked into high gear. He was cornered, out in the open, and something had startled him. He twisted his head, scanning for an escape route. That was the critical moment. Fear had seized him. Fear that, historically, always manifested as aggression. Would he lash out? Would he bolt? Yet in that same moment, a small voice cut through the tension. "Samson, it's okay." Eleanor had slipped under the rope barrier, ignoring Dorian's frantic wave to stay back. She hurried forward until she stood just a few feet from the towering bear, her eyes brimming with the same compassion that first drew him to her. She didn't even notice the ringmaster or her mother shouting her name. She kept her voice calm, the way she might soothe a frightened dog. Samson's roar choked off into a questioning grunt. His eyes flickered down to the little figure in overalls. She held out her hand, as she'd done so many times before, offering an apple. Slowly, Samson lowered his massive body back to all fours. The tension in his limbs seemed to ebb. He stepped toward her, sniffing, and gently took the apple from her hand. Eleanor rubbed his muzzle, tears of relief spilling onto her cheeks. The ringmaster stared in astonishment, as if witnessing a dream. Dorian exhaled, trembling with relief. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, and it was just a little girl and a once ferocious bear, both breathing in a hush of perfect understanding. "Unbelievable," Marcel Dupont muttered, stepping forward. Though he was a showman accustomed to illusions, he knew authentic magic when he saw it. The bond between Eleanor and Samson wasn't a trick or a novelty. It was a testament to something deeper, an innate capacity for empathy crossing the boundary between human and beast. It was a moment that redefined everything the ringmaster thought he knew about the limits of his enterprise. From that day on, Samson's life began to change. The ringmaster, albeit grudgingly at first, agreed to let Dorian continue training him. He allowed Samson more space, an enclosed pen outside his cage, some time each day to stretch his legs and roam without feeling like a caged prisoner. Eleanor's involvement became a source of debate among the carnival staff, but even the skeptics could not deny. Samson responded to her presence in ways he did not with anyone else. He trusted her. He looked for her in a crowd. Eleanor's mother eventually softened, seeing her daughter's unwavering devotion and witnessing how the bear truly never showed aggression toward the girl. She allowed Eleanor to continue visiting, but only in the presence of Dorian or another trainer. Each day, Samson grew more at ease with the carnival's rhythms. Gradually, Dorian introduced gentle cues, asking Samson to stand on a small pedestal, to walk in a figure eight. They never forced him with cruelty or intimidation. They used only positive reinforcement. And while Samson would sometimes revert to cautionary roars if startled, he soon learned that this new environment didn't threaten him in the way he'd once believed. Behind the scenes, the ringmaster devised a plan. If Samson grew comfortable enough, they could present a special act featuring the untamable bear, now transformed by kindness. It was a pitch that, if done carefully, might dazzle audiences and generate stories. After all, crowds love a redemption tale. They love to see the impossible made possible. But Marcel promised to keep it safe. No insane stunts, no child in the ring. Just a small demonstration of Samson's docile side, with an experienced trainer at his side. Still, talk of the performance made Eleanor uneasy. She worried about bright lights, loud music, cheering crowds. Would it all overwhelm Samson? The last thing she wanted was for him to relapse into panic and possibly be punished for it. But Dorian assured her that they'd go slowly. If Samson showed any sign of distress, they'd stop. They'd spent weeks building trust, and they wouldn't squander it by forcing the bear into another terrifying situation. The day of Samson's grand debut arrived. The big top was filled with gasping spectators. They'd come to see trapeze artists, lion tamers, clowns, and everything in between. But the hush that fell when the ringmaster announced a new act was palpable. The lights dimmed. A single spotlight illuminated Dorian, and, behind him, the hulking silhouette of Samson. The crowd tensed, bracing for raw power or danger. Under the watchful eye of the audience, Dorian guided Samson around the ring. The bear followed simple cues. He rose on his hind legs, circled once, and gently accepted a fish from Dorian's hand. The people cheered, but softly at first, as if they were afraid to set him off with loud applause. By the end of the routine, Samson even swiped a paw in an almost friendly wave, though it was probably just him responding to a hand gesture from Dorian. The audience erupted in wonder and relief. They clapped, whistled, and cheered for the once wild beast who now roamed the ring without a chain, without fear. Backstage, Eleanor waited in the wings, peeking through a slit in the tense, heavy fabric. Her heart swelled with pride. She saw none of the old savage fury in Samson's eyes. Instead, she saw a glimmer of calm curiosity. He was uncertain about the noise and lights, but not terrified. The roar of the crowd did not send him into a frenzy. It was the crowning moment of weeks of painstaking effort. Tears formed at the corners of her eyes. She felt something shift within her, some profound lesson about the power of compassion, the resilience of creatures labeled as lost causes, and the extraordinary bond that could form when fear gave way to empathy. After the show, Samson returned to his enclosure, not a cramped cage, but a slightly larger penned area they'd built. Dorian gave him a pat of reassurance, praising him softly as the carnival staff milled around, exchanging excited commentary on how well the act went. The ringmaster himself approached, beaming with that opportunistic showman's grin. "That was brilliant, Dorian," he exclaimed. Then his voice lowered. "I still won't allow the girl inside the ring during a performance, but keep letting her visit. If she continues to help Samson maintain his calm demeanor, we might have a real star on our hands." Dorian nodded, but his eyes flicked to Eleanor, who stood a short distance away, her mother's hand on her shoulder. He sensed that, to the girl, Samson was more than a potential star. He was a friend, and the bond they shared was deeper than any carnival act. Time marched on. The carnival's postcards arrived sporadically, a photograph of Samson in an enclosure in the next county, a short note from Dorian saying he was still making progress. Eleanor kept these mementos on her nightstand. She'd sit at her window sometimes, watching the orchard behind her house, imagining how Samson might fare under new skies, with new faces peering at him in wonder. She grew older, but the memory of that powerful bond never faded. It shaped her in subtle ways. She found herself volunteering at a local animal shelter, gentle with creatures people deemed unadoptable or difficult. She saw herself in them. She remembered Samson's eyes, and how everyone labeled him dangerous because of their own fear, never asking what he might fear in return. Years later, long after she became a young adult, Eleanor heard rumors that Cirque du Destin had changed its animal policies. In line with the shifting cultural attitudes, the carnival reduced the number of performances involving wild animals. Dorian fought for better living conditions and eventually advocated for Samson to be transferred to a spacious wildlife sanctuary. A real place Montana grizzly encounter. Near Bozeman, Montana was said to take in rescued bears. Word was that Samson, older now, lived in peace on a wide patch of land, free to roam without bars or fear of whips and bright lights. The news came to Eleanor in the form of a letter from Dorian, a short note scrawled in shaky handwriting. "My dear Eleanor, the first remember the day I nearly lost my mind seeing you in Samson's cage. Thank goodness I didn't, because your bond with him taught me that even the most powerful creatures can be moved by compassion. I've retired from the carnival now. Samson lives in Montana, at a sanctuary that'll let him be as close to wild as he can be. Given the circumstances, he's still calm, but he's still Samson, proud, independent, and fierce in spirit. Thought you'd like to know. I hope you're well. Forever grateful, Dorian Fitzroy." Eleanor wept with a bittersweet joy. She'd always worried about Samson living a life on the road, feeling the old pangs of captivity. But now she knew he was cared for, respected, and finally free from the harsh ring lights and claustrophobic cages. She vowed that one day she would go visit him, stand in the open air where he roamed, and see her old friend once more.